Seeam Shahid Noor is a product manager and a senior strategy consultant at IBM, but is primarily known as a creator in the education niche where he helps aspiring students with tips and tricks to be better at what they do. With hundreds of thousands of followers online, Seeam uses his expertise from his current role and draws from the time he got his degree at the prestigious Harvard University. In this episode, Seeam and I sit down from two different ends of the world and discuss his journey, the creator industry, and what it takes to be successful as a creator in this education niche. And just note that this podcast was recorded in early 2022, and the artwork and the animation was done by the talented Ahmed Fahim. And without further ado, here is The State of the Creators, Season 3, Episode 4, featuring Seeam Shahid Noor. Hope you enjoy the show. This is The State of the Creators, a show about creative individuals who are on a quest to build something out of nothing. Before anything else, everybody dreams of Ivy League and going to Harvard. What made you chase that aspect on a personal level?
Good question. I don't think I've ever really dreamt of getting into Ivy League universities. It wasn't in my plan. I was studying in a military school back home, and the plan was to finish your HSC and then either apply to the national institutions, the national engineering, the national medical institutions, or go to the armed forces. So my plan, I think initially, given my kind of proclivities and my talent, was to go to IBA in Dhaka University, like the business school back home. And the way I planned or prepared throughout my end of my high school life was to prepare for IBA. Towards the end of it, I think, one or two of my friends, they were dreamers, and they started to look into people getting into like the top scholarship programs of University of British Columbia, or let's say Stanford, or some really good universities. And he was looking into the profiles of those people, and they're like, yeah, they're impressive profiles, but I think our profiles are somewhat comparable, And why are we underestimating ourselves? Because those kids went to English medium schools and those kids were taught to dream bigger, why shouldn't we, right? And the idea behind our application was, regardless of whether we succeed or not, at least we'll be familiar with the process such that we would be in influential roles to guide the future generations in military schools to get into those schools. So I don't think it was a target necessarily. It was just we wanted to go through the process. And if our profiles are good, might as well apply to the top ones. Also, given my socioeconomic conditions, I was in serious need of financial aid. And very few universities are need blind when it comes to international students and provided full financial aid. Harvard, Yale, MIT, Princeton being the 4 out of the 5 universities in those categories. So Harvard naturally became a top choice. I don't think it's, if I have to be brutally honest, I think it's their financial aid program. That was the most wonderful thing about their university when I was applying. I never dreamt of getting in. I never dreamt of going into. It all came as a surprise.
Now, it's interesting you mentioned that, even if you don't succeed, or if you do, that you'd become almost like a template for other kids in your school or in your area, and you kind of do a lot of that right now with the content that you create. It's almost like the seed that was in your brain from a very early age is still kind of bearing the fruit. So it's pretty awesome to see. But for those who don't know, who is Seeam Shahid Noor?
I'm involved in a few things right now. So I am a product manager at IBM, so involved in the tech space and creating B2B products. I am an educational content creator based in Bangladesh, and I make content about learning, growth, productivity, and whatnot. So that's my second identity, and the third one is I'm also a founder. I'm a co-founder of OneThread, which is a project management SaaS company based off in Bangladesh. So, I try to do few different things, trying out my interest to see what I eventually stick to or what I like. But yeah, to recap, a tech product manager, content creator, and somewhat of an entrepreneur.
That's very fascinating because I would say most of the creators who are part of this podcast and that I've interviewed or sat down to speak with, including myself, as a creator, like we all have this multifaceted
Yeah.
identities, right? Why do you think that is? Like I mean, it almost feels like we're a different breed of people, right? Like a lot of people don't get it. Like when I speak to a few friends about, and I think you can relate to it as well in the fact that we have different kind of groups of people with whom we talk about our different interests, right?
Yeah.
And while a lot of people would have that, but the work that we do, we don't just do it for hobby. We put a lot of effort in, we put a lot of passion into it. Like, why do you think that is? Like, why do we do this to ourselves?
I don't think, I really have the answer to that part where we are obsessed over, putting so much time in content creation. But I do think content creation derives from just being able to express oneself in general. A lot of people do it through art. A lot of people do it through music, poetry. And I think everyone kind of has that desire to express themselves. It just happens to be that, we are also somewhat good in, let's say, video editing or storytelling, or we have an expertise in a certain area that people want to know about, that eventually the outlet through which we want to express ourselves gain the following. It's very similar to the urge to, physically assert yourself, right? And a lot of people do it through sports. Since you just don't get big in sports that easily, or you just don't, sports is a different ballgame altogether. You don't see many people becoming sports stars when they started it as hobbies almost, right?
Yeah.
But in this recent day and age, when media and content creation have become such minimally gate kept ways of entry, we just got lucky in a way that our expression became something that people are following. So I think it's a part of everyone to want to express themselves, although our obsession in putting in the hours is something I'm not able to explain yet.
That's a good answer because I don't think I can explain it either. I think we'll need someone to do one of your analytical database project on this, and then maybe we'll get somewhat of a concrete answer. But like you work at IBM in quite a strenuous department where it does take a lot of analytical skills, a lot of in-depth research. So why did you specifically decide to also create content for the educational side of things? Like what was the reason behind? Like you could have just sat down and be like, what? I have a good job. I live in the US. I can just relax on my weekends and when I'm not working. But I just decided to start making content around education.
Yeah.
Why that? Decision?
That's a good question. I think initially it started off for two reasons. The first one being, when I was growing up or when I was in high school, I realized, there few of us realized together at the same time that we have potential, and we need to find avenues to explore it, right? And we had to go through a lot to gain the knowledge to know how can we get to these top universities. When I was studying in those universities, I realized that a lot of people have the potential, but not necessarily the knowledge in an accessible manner that they can use to eventually see that they live up to their potential. And finding the knowledge yourself it's a rather difficult process, and if you spend energy into that, you'll have less energy to spend in building your application. So I just wanted to reduce the inertia or the accessibility issue when it came to people coming from somewhat humble backgrounds looking to go into these top universities. So that was point number one. And point number two was the scalable nature of it. Like when I got it, I would get hundreds of messages per week on how to get in, and it would when you're providing the same advice again and again, you must ask yourself, like, is this the best way to do it? Right? It wasn't scalable. It was taking more of my time. And at the same time, a lot of people probably had the same questions, but weren't brave enough or, were shy to not ask them, right? So to solve the scalability issue and, the accessibility of information issue, I initially started content creation in a very niche category, which was study abroad, right? As the channel grew, and I realized that it is serving a lot more needs than the two I mentioned, but those needs were more personal. It was serving as a creative outlet for me. It was serving, I could express myself in it. It was adding, meaning to my life, right? Meaning in a way that I had the capacity to leave the world a better place than it was, or my work has, some form of a chain impact where it is minimally shaping the next generations that come after me, right? And in a world where we are struggling to find meaning, I wanted to latch on to the small thing that provided me with some. So eventually, I started taking content creation very seriously and started providing time to it. I think the next steps of what it will turn into is that now that I'm getting meaning from it as well, how do I make it even more sustainable and scalable? And then eventually one could start treating it as a business, right? So I'm at a point where I have somewhat started to see, content creation as somewhat of a business opportunity, but I'm not really liking it because it does somewhat take away from the very spontaneous nature of content creation and the joy that comes with, being able to do it the way you want, and, treating it as a business kind of hampers that. So I don't know if I want to delve right into it. I don't want deadlines from my sponsors. I don't want to spend, 4 or 5 Zoom meetings talking with the sponsor about how to best place their clip. It just takes away from the liberty I get from it. I don't want to make it feel like another job. So I'm kind of like waddling towards between, whether I want to treat it as a business or whether I want to keep it as a platform of showing creative expression and finding meaning.
I mean, if you had the option of choosing between your current role at IBM versus being a full-time creator, which, let's say, pays that X amount of money that will make you, happy in all levels, would you choose one over the other? If so, which one would you
That's
choose?
a good question. I personally think that if you're talking exactly about my current role, I hope my office does not see this, right? If you're talking exactly about my current role and, getting the same amount of pay as a content creator full-time, I would 100% choose being a full-time content creator. But at the same time, like being a product manager opens doors to so many things, right? And my hope was, by working at this company in this role, I would pick up product manager skills, which will eventually, help me probably work in a product that I'm more interested in. It could be an educational product, right? Like Khan Academy. It could be a product I love, like Spotify. And, if I could get the opportunity to work at those companies, then I don't think the decision would be that easy, right? But right now I'm doing like B2B, high impact enterprise work, which is not my cup of tea. Like I'm learning a lot and I love my team, but it's not my cup of tea.
And one thing you mentioned in your previous answer about, you're at the crossroads where you can almost decide to take your content creation to the next level of turning it into a full-time, business. But then lose that feeling of passion because you'll have to work with sponsors, you'll have to cater to the needs of a wider audience, and provide, meeting the numbers, something that I talk about a lot, on my channel and my newsletter and things of that sort. But with it almost seems like this is an ongoing thing for creators across all, even in the artistic side of things. Like I remember, I'm a big John Mayer fan, who's a musician, and he did this talk at Berkeley ages ago. One of my favorite talks. Like any creator should watch it. He mentioned there that he was making a few songs that he knew will please his record label, so that he can make 7 or 8 other songs in the album that will reach a wider audience. Because without those 2 or 3 songs, that gets him to a place of more eyes and or more listeners. He wouldn't be able to get his 7 or 8 songs that he loves, he passionately wants to create, to that wider audience. And it almost is like an exchange of that. Okay, I'm going to do these 20 to 30% of the tasks to please you, but here's the 80% that will please me. So I think you could potentially, and that was a very specific example, but I think it's almost feeling like I'm giving you unsolicited advice. But I feel as a creator, I think you could potentially go that route. Like, do you think that's something you would be interested to do, or do you want every card to be in your hands and be like, I want to play it exactly the way I want?
That's a great question. I did definitely agree with you on this. I did think about it, and now kind of seeing how my channel is growing, I'm thinking about strategies where I can ensure growth but also put out what I want, and it has to be like a ratio of for every 3 videos that I put out for the audience, I could put out 1 video for myself, right? And I think that's definitely doable. I think the issue, if you want to become a full-time content creator, I feel at one point or the other, you must start treating your content channels as a business. Otherwise, it's 100%. Not sustainable. You cannot, you cannot do it full-time. It will only stop you from putting out the content you really want, right? So oftentimes I realize for these content creators, the bottleneck is money, right? And that hasn't been a bottleneck for me because I'm, getting my money from my full-time job, and it's more than enough to subsidize my content creation. So far I'm not too worried about surviving, right? If I do want to become a content creator full-time, which I don't want yet, or which I don't want as of now, I would consider, looking at these business ventures and finding a balance of feeding the pockets and feeding the soul.
As soon as you start looking at it from a business angle, you have to look at the things that you can delegate and outsource, right? Because as you mentioned, you don't want to sit in 5 Zoom meetings about sponsors. That's where you can have a manager who can do it on your behalf. Or you can have an editor if you don't like editing. You can always do 10 different things depending on the creator you are. But, your growth was quite significant because I've noticed that your channel, on YouTube, even though it's been around for a while, I think you kind of took it seriously with, not even seriously, but, the Bangladeshi Perspective, which was a series of interviews that you did with, prominent Bangladeshis around the world. You started to post regularly with that type of, interview style content, and then you made a shift towards the study abroad, and then you're now doing a lot more productivity, personal growth, and things of that sort, right? Through that journey, it seems like the last 2 years is when you've had a very significant growth of, right now sitting at over 170 plus, 170,000 plus subscribers. So what do you think contributed to such a big growth in such a, I know there are channels who have millions in 6 months, but I think this is still a very good, significant growth for a creator. So what do you think contributed to that?
I think, the past year has been wonderful when it came to growth. I think at the 2021 January, I hadn't opened my Facebook page yet, and my YouTube was at 10,000-ish. And now, it's YouTube is at over 170. Facebook, which I opened at the beginning of February, has crossed 200,000. And wow. I think the growth significantly came from, 2 things. First, finding a gap. I realized, the type of content I made that content already exists in English, and when it already exists, those keywords and the search engine recommendations and everything in YouTube doesn't favor you, right? YouTube is the second biggest search engine in the world, and it doesn't favor you if you're a small creator, right? You have to hack other ways, like you have to hack watch time or thumbnails. You can't hack the search engine to favor you. So I realized, the search engine will only favor me when I'm providing something that the existing content already don't. And that comes with a cap, but switching to Bangla was that decision, right? Like if they're looking for the same content from Bangladesh, the search engine should be intelligent enough to pick up that you have the same content by, let's say, Thomas Frank, but you also have the same content by someone who spoke in Bangla. So let me show it to the Bangladeshis, right? So that was one decision. And the second decision is strategically trying to find out what is the natural next big market. So, first I started with, let's say, USA undergrad, right? Which is a very small market. Like, how do you go from Bangladesh to studying undergrad in the US? Once I got some traction in it, the next natural big market, if you see, I create a playlist with like Takian Apu and Nadim Bhai both went to MIT from Bangladesh. That's the natural step from going to undergrad to postgrad, right? So I captured that market. Once I captured that market, the next big step would be to learn the English necessary to go into these universities. So learning English is the natural next big step. And from that, you could eventually jump into just teaching English in general, which a lot of creators did, like, Munzarin Apu, 1 minute English with Meme, or, Sonia Apu, all of them did those and captured that market, but that wasn't quite aligned with my interest. So I was like, okay, so if, they know about learning English, if they know about going abroad, how do I cater to an even bigger audience, which doesn't alienate the present audience? So one natural progression was the admission in Bangladesh. And then from admission, I went into studying in general, right? So you have try at any given point, you will have a market, and you will have, if it's like if you're probably familiar with like startup pitch decks when they're, designing total addressable market, serviceable market, and how one circle encapsulates the other. So when you're playing in this market, if you want to grow, especially as a let's say educational content creator in Bangladesh, which is a small market size to begin with, you have to understand, okay, I'm operating in this small circle. What's the next big circle that I could capture that also captures this circle, right? So that is how my growth went. Undergrad USA 10K, postgrad 25K, learning English 50K. And then admission 75K, study content 200K, and now is the problem. I don't see any natural next step, so I kind of have to find new ways to recycle the study content, and that would help my YouTube to get to like 400 or 500K, my Facebook to maybe get to 1 million. After that, I'm done.
Right.
After that, I cannot grow anymore. Right? Unless we have a crazy amount of people coming into Facebook in Bangladesh, but I think it's almost saturated, and the people coming in are coming in from TikTok or other short form content, and they won't necessarily like the long form content. So I think my shelf life, the max I can do is maybe 300, 400, maybe 500K on YouTube and 1 million on Facebook. That's the max I can do with this educational content. And then I'm done.
I mean, we kind of had a bit of a discussion about this just a few days ago, right? I think I spoke about the fact that my take was that it's easier to build. It's faster. I think I mentioned easier, but I think what I meant was it's faster to grow in Bangladesh because I think saying Bangla, because there's a need for certain types of content, you could potentially start building and filling up those voids because the counterparts in English is already filled up. But I think your argument was that sure, but if you do it in English, it has a longer shelf life, meaning that you'll have, a wider audience, as opposed to Bangla, which has a
Yeah.
ceiling. So despite that, what has been the hardest thing about building an audience in Bangladesh for you?
It's so many things, man. So many things. I think I think, like, I don't know how to, put it in a way that, doesn't stain or alienate my audience, if you know what I mean.
You
Yeah.
just trying to find a
Yeah,
diplomatic
right?
way.
It's like,
Just to say that, okay, I'm gonna say something that doesn't offend you, but hear me out. Like, how do you
yeah,
say it
yeah.
in a way that
And
will offend the girlfriend?
that's my
Yeah.
exact dilemma. I think, okay, I'll straight out put it, right? I think, uh, a lot of the audience are, extremely negative, and here's an issue. I feel YouTube has done a fantastic algorithm where mostly the positive comments surface up, right? Facebook hasn't done that yet. And since in Bangladesh most people are based in Facebook, um,
Mm.
and the overwhelming amount of negative comments come in, they're very visible and they're very
Mm.
ruthless, right? So that has been difficult, right? YouTube is like you. I love YouTube. I absolutely love it. I think the quality of audience I get, they watch my content more. The comments are mostly positive. The comments are, mostly showing a learning attitude or the capacity to have nuanced discussions. I did not see that in Facebook, right? I think
Right.
the way audience engages is completely different. They're a different person. The same audience is a different person on Facebook, and sadly in Bangladesh, most people find your content on Facebook, right? So they watch it for
Mm.
less time. If you watch it for less time, your capacity to comprehend the content goes down. They're less, like, given that they're less willing to have a nuanced discussion. They're more ready to jump into commenting in negative. I think it's and also the negative voices are somehow always more louder than the positive ones, right? Like the urge to spew negative comments and hatred, I don't necessarily think it's just a Bangladeshi thing,
No, it's
right?
not.
But like, I when I made
But it almost feels like it's a common in the Bangladeshi circuit sometimes, doesn't it? Like on the Facebook side of things,
yeah,
at least.
I think it's common with short form content, and the reason I say it is I have been looking into the content TikTokers in the US receive, right? The comment they receive on their content. And I can assure you, there is an overwhelming amount of negative comments on those. I think when people are engaging with short form content, they don't bring their critical thinking, analytical thinking, capacity to have, broad discussions. They don't bring that version of themselves. They bring that, I wanna watch this content. I wanna think too much. I'll just leave whatever I'm feeling without thinking too far ahead version of themselves. And unfortunately, Bangladeshi creators have, since they achieve growth on Facebook, they find those versions of people more, right? I've seen comments
Yeah.
of big YouTubers in Bangladesh. I've seen their YouTube comments. They're not that bad. They're pretty good, right? It's
Mm.
only when they release content on Facebook they get, that ruthless version of, negative comments. And my fear is that it's getting worse because
Mm.
there's a surge of audience coming in from these short form contents, right? From TikTok. Facebook just released Facebook Reels for everyone. So you will get a lot
Mm.
of content from those. So it almost feels like, you are going to get bashed, as a content creator by, audience with negative comments, and it will be a part of your job description unless you only make content on YouTube. then you will get very limited growth, but you will be kind of safeguarded from all of that.
It's it was almost like telling a harsh truth to your girlfriend almost, or your partner, and then how can you put it in a nice way? But I think you just decided to rip the band-aid off and be like, you know what, you guys are really really
Yeah, it's
ruthless.
it's bad.
But look, so how do you deal with that negativity, right? I think this is, and I think one thing you mentioned is pretty fantastic. I mean, this fantastic way of mentioning it is that it almost comes with a job description of being a creator these days, that you will receive, negative comments, you will receive bad comments, and it will hit you, right? Like when you started out, when you first started seeing those negative comments towards you, how did you deal with it? Do you still, a lot of the creators that I speak to kind of have gotten over it, be like, have a thick skin, it'll always come with it. Well, how have you dealt with it
It
personally?
used to hurt a lot. It still hurts. I have not learned how to deal with it. My fellow content creators who are like much bigger in numbers, I guess, than me, and thus had more exposure to
Hmm.
the broader audience of Bangladesh in on Facebook, who come armed with all of their frustration, all of their suffering in life projected into a negative comment that they put on a creator, right? They just completely ignore it. And I haven't got to
Mm.
that level yet. But I feel there's no other way. You have to learn just to completely ignore it. And most of these creators, like if you see their comment section, they don't engage with the comments at all. They just put out
Yeah,
content
exactly.
and that's it. They just they
Let's
just
keep going. Do you, do you think the audience is smarter than the creator?
what does that even mean, right? Like I have heard this saying, like John Mayer probably said that in the, I saw that clip. I don't know, was it Colin and Samir or something like?
Mm.
Do you think the audience is smarter than the creator? Like, what do you mean by that, right? And then I can probably go for or defend this.
Sure. I think it's almost in the sense that you, once you've decided who your audience is, you always try to think that you always try to cater to them and their needs, thinking that they're like you can maneuver their taste, you can maneuver what you want them to think, but in more often than not, they will be the one to decide what's good and what's bad. And sometimes as creators, we sometimes think that, oh, you know what, I'm smarter than you because I'm the one creating the content, I'm the one creating the music in this case. But and I know this will hit, but it doesn't because the audience decides at the end of the day. So when you're creating, I think obviously there's a little bit of friction from your end with certain audience types that you get, the negative ones. Do you still value their opinions in terms of what they? Because ultimately the algorithm pushes what the
Yeah.
audience decides to see more or see less, right? So do you personally think that ultimately the audience is shaping you or you're shaping the
Uh,
audience?
I think it goes both ways, but at the same time, I think the audience does have more influence. And the way I say, it goes both ways is because, first of all, like, I don't think it's wise to listen to a single person's comment from the audience and give it much attention, right? Like, I get all sorts of requests, and I know most of them would just be flop videos, right? It's only
Mm.
when a series of people requests a video on the same topic, I pay some heed to it. But on top of that, I
Mm.
think the wisest indicator of what content to put out is the demonstrated behavior of the audience. What type of video do they
Right.
engage to, right? Like, if, for instance, if you put out a video of how to study versus how not to study, right? You think that how to study is a content that is gonna be more of a hit because people need to know how.
Mm.
I would almost argue that how not to study or the common study mistakes is better content. And that's given, no one asks for that content, right? Everyone is like,
Right.
teach me how to study. No one asks for it. But I've seen time and again content about don't do these mistakes or like when it comes to education, at least hit much more, right? In that case, the audience didn't ask for it,
Right.
but their demonstrated behavior,
Right.
the way they're clicking, the way they're engaging, shows that that is the content to put out. So demonstrated behavior of your audience
Right.
is the wisest indicator of all. The second best is like if a lot of people request the same thing, that could be one indicator of content you should put out. And then the third is like, I think you as a creator, you do shape how one can approach certain content, right? If there is demand of how to not study, you can approach it in a myriad of ways. You could give like a bullet list. You can come at it with like very evidence-based techniques. You can come at it with a narrative. You can come at it from your personal experience. There's a lot of ways you can come at it, and that is when the creator shapes the audience. People who like evidence-based approach to things will follow your content. People who like more
Right.
anecdotal, which is usually the majority, anecdotal, like I found this was useful, back in my days, they're gonna follow that creator. So you do have a strong influence in the audience you're shaping. The problem becomes is that there is usually a type that is more dominant, right? In that case, an anecdotal approach to education is far more popular than an evidence-based approach. So, at one point you have to come to terms with it, that your style is just not gonna cut it if you want to grow, right? And whether you want to come to terms with it is your, personal choice. So yeah,
Right.
like the audience, yeah, like I wouldn't call the audience wiser, right? Because they aren't really, they're not really predicting in a way, like they're not really consciously predicting what content you should put out. It's only their subconscious or like demonstrated behavior, which is the wisest form of, like no, like if you spoke to 100 audience of Mr. Beast, they wouldn't be able to say that, okay, change the scenario every 10 seconds, use big fonts that pop up on the
Yeah.
screen, make rapid cuts, use flashy videos that relate to a lot of generous, philanthropy. They wouldn't be able to say it. Mr. Beast figured out all of that on his own by looking at the demonstrated behavior. So I don't think the audience is like wiser than the creator. I think their demonstrated behavior is the best way to get at what content you have to make.
Why do you think creators in Bangladesh lack diversity? If do you think they lack
I don't-
diversity?
Diversity in terms of content, I don't think they lack it at all. The audience shapes the content creation, and in Bangladesh, after a certain level, like right now, the cap is like 100,000. You can have very nuanced niche content and reach 100,000 easily. After that, you cannot
Right.
move ahead. You have to cater to the broader audience, and they want a very specific type of content in every genre. And if you don't absolutely, I guess, comply to that, you can't grow. So like my content, you will see will start to change, right? Like my long form 9-minute evidence-based content is not cutting it anymore. I have to boil it down to like 4-minute, one anecdote, one point, right? Without any nuance, without any description. And then, I will basically become a different version of the content Ayman Sadiq and Salman Sadiq Bhai has already put out, right? There's a reason everyone
Right.
converges to that, because otherwise you just cannot grow. So I don't think there are lack of diverse content creators. I think there's a lack of diverse audience.
Personally, do you get through creative ruts or creative blocks? And if you do, what do you do to get out of it? Like, do you get stuck for ideas sometimes? Sometimes you don't want to make a video. Like, what do you usually
I
do?
don't go through creative blocks because, I watch a lot of content, and every time I come across content that could be content for my channel, I just put it in Notion, or like one of my idea generation blocks. So creative
Yeah.
blocks has not been the issue. Energy blocks has been the issue. Like I don't have the energy most of the
Right.
times. It's because of like my other commitments, which would give me higher ROI, and then I put more energy into it, and there's only so much I have left. And the way that
Yeah.
I have tried somewhat successfully, somewhat unsuccessfully to deal with those blocks is, have a fixed schedule. Even if that doesn't work, I try to kind of identify a fixed moment in the day. So it has to be like noon where there is sunlight. It has to be a day where I don't have too much work. And that is when I step aside to make content. And for that to be sustainable, I generate ideas whenever I can. So whenever I'm free, I just write the script for the next video without even knowing when I can shoot the next video. So the moment I get free time, I shoot that video.
Yeah.
That has been kind of one way that I've been approaching it. And I try to I look at other creators who are being successful. I try to look at what type of content they make, and then I try to change my video structure to match somewhat of the structure those successful content creators are trying to do. And that's where the problem, right? That's how we converge. That's how we lack diversity. But yeah, and like,
Yeah.
write your script.
I mean, the copycat will always be there. I think that's anything that becomes successful, you'll have hundreds of thousands of copycats. It's been true with all forms of different art forms, and obviously now with content, like anything that becomes good, you'll have 100 copycats. So I think you're right across there. Look, what is a quality piece of content to you
Quality
as a consumer?
A quality piece of content is something where something which is gripping, can hold my attention, and either entertain me or teach me something at the same time. So that's it, right? It could be Gotham
Right.
chess reviews of like championships. It could be Veritasium talking about Magnus effect, right? It could be anything, but it has to be gripping, and it has to be either entertaining or educational.
Right. What's your biggest reward as a creator?
My biggest reward so far has been meeting the consumers of my content in person and knowing that my content had a positive impact in their life. I feel if you're a Bangladeshi-based creator abroad, living abroad, that's what you're missing. Go to Bangladesh, organize a meetup, or go to a place where you run into your audience, talk to them, and it will be such a rewarding experience. I assure you. Like, that absolutely changed my energy when I met my audience, and I saw the impact I had in their lives. I was like, that's why I do this, right? That's what all this is for. So that has been my most rewarding experience.
But I think that's one of the biggest highs is when somebody comes to you and tells you that like your work has made my day or changed. Even the comments as well. I think that's what I personally love is when somebody says, "Oh, I had a bad day. I looked at some of your work and it just made my day." I think those are the things that really make a difference. Look, I know we're short on time today, so I'll cut to the chase. What's your personal goal in 5 years with in terms of creating content?
I don't have any, man. I just want to, for this year, I set one goal. I want to put out content weekly, right? That's my only goal this year. I did not set anything.
System oriented rather than
It just
goal
doesn't
oriented.
work out in Bangladesh, right? Like, you have content creators who went from 0 to 500,000 in 2 months. You have content creators who didn't make it in 2 years in Bangladesh.
And to be fair, I think I should change my question because 5 years is such a long time in the content world, right? It's even a year is such a different, from point A to point B is like it can. So I think in the future I should start changing this question for my future guests. But you're right. I think that having that focus of posting weekly is probably way better. Finally, for someone who wants to walk the path of creating content like yourself, what are 3 things or 3 actionable steps that you advise them to take?
It's hard because I have so many, but
But the 3 top ones or 3
okay,
the top of your head.
get started. Don't think about a lot of other things. See what you like talking about and get started. Number 2 is consistency over everything else. If you're consistent, eventually quality will come to you. If you're consistent in paying heed to your audience, eventually understanding the audience will come to you. Do be consistent in whatever your priorities are. And number three is delegate what you don't like. Once you want to build a sustainable system, you cannot have any roadblocks. And oftentimes, doing things that you don't like are the roadblocks. Like I didn't personally like editing my educational videos. I delegated it away. I wasn't that good at thumbnail making. I delegated that away, right? So to recap, get started. Don't care too much about what other things. Be extremely consistent in creation, in getting feedback in anything you do, and delegate away what you don't like.
Dude, that's fantastic tips. I wish we had a bit more time, but it seems like I'll have to bring you back for a part two because there's so many more questions that I'd love to ask you. So, dude, appreciate it. Thanks for your time, Seeam. I know you gotta run. So
thank you so much for having me. I'm sorry once again, but the other meeting is.
It is what it is.
It had to be today, and I did not have any leeway. Yeah. Okay.
It's all good, man. All right, I'll catch you soon. Take care.